Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening up a file that is, well, it's profoundly local, but it's also universally relevant. We're doing a deep dive into the history of Rutherford County, Tennessee, a history that's beautiful, complicated, painful, and, as we'll see, deeply unfinished.
Right. And our mission today is really to give you a shortcut to understanding this whole journey of historical reckoning in this one community.
We're focusing on a tough subject, the legacy of racial terror, specifically the lynching of a man named John Jack Bell.
And the movement, really, to finally bring home the county's Equal Justice Initiative monument that's meant to honor him and 3 other men.
We're going to explore how this county's immense wealth was built, some incredible acts of community courage that sparked modern action, and then the frustrating reality of why that action just stalled.
And that's where the central tension is, the real surprise in the source material. The monument itself, the one currently waiting in Montgomery for Rutherford County, it has the wrong names on it.
Wow. So the whole process is stalled because they first have to correct the historical record.
Exactly. It demands precision, not just enthusiasm. The community has to do this meticulous, detailed historical work before they can even think about the physical act of retrieval.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We have to set the stage. And we're not going to start this story in the 1800s. We're starting in the very recent past.
2017.
Right, 2017. We have to understand the spark of modern community action that brought all of this historical trauma right back into the public eye.
That's right, because sometimes, the push for historical reckoning doesn't come from looking backward. It comes from a crisis in the present.
A crisis that forces a community to decide what it stands for.
Exactly. And that choice creates the moral clarity you need to finally confront the past.
So the stage for this was set nationally in August 2017, Charlottesville, Virginia. I think we all remember those images. They were just shocking, so unsettling, spreading all over social media and the news.
Organized white supremacist groups marching openly with torches.
Carrying symbols of hate, just aggressively spreading fear. It felt like a turning point.
It was a national crisis moment, for sure. It was this stark, very public display of an ideology that had, for the most part, been confined to the shadows or, online forums.
But what's crucial here is how quickly that violence, that threat, tried to expand.
Oh, immediately. The same organizers, they were emboldened by what happened in Virginia, and they announced they were coming to Tennessee.
Just 2 months later.
2 months later. And they targeted 2 specific places. First, Shelbyville, and then Murfreesboro, the county seat of Rutherford County.
And their goal was just blatant intimidation.
Completely. Divide communities, recruit, and basically prove that their ideology was alive and well right in the heart of the Mid-South.
So for Murfreesboro, this becomes an immediate, an unavoidable inflection point.
The community was faced with a real threat. A threat to their physical safety, yes, but also to their whole sense of civic identity.
The choice is pretty clear. You either retreat in fear or you meet that threat with some kind of moral stand.
And the response was the immediate formation of this group called Murfreesboro Loves.
The sources really emphasize this part. It wasn't a political group.
No, not in the traditional sense. It was intentionally nonpartisan, non-political.
And why was that so important?
Because that was the core of its power. It wasn't a protest against a specific policy. It was this broad moral coalition defending the basic social fabric of the county against an outside group trying to sow hatred.
It created a powerful, unified counter-narrative.
Exactly. And the coalition itself tells you everything about the kind of unity they managed to build. It was incredibly diverse.
So who was involved?
Well, you had local churches stepping up immediately. They opened their sanctuaries, which right away gave the movement safe spaces and a sense of moral authority.
Then you had the grassroots organizers, many of whom had never worked together before.
Right, and they're coordinating all the complex logistics, making sure residents are safe while also making this very visible statement.
And I thought this was such a brilliant strategy, the artists and musicians.
Yes. They basically reclaimed the symbolic heart of the city, the town square. They turned it into this dynamic space of unity and celebration.
Which effectively made it unusable for the hate groups. They used culture as a shield.
A shield and a countermessage. And you also had huge involvement from students and educators. From MTSU, from local schools.
So the younger generation was saying, you are not hijacking our city's identity.
It was a lesson in civic responsibility happening in real time, and the result was dramatic.
The sources are very clear on this. The white supremacist rally in Murfreesboro just collapsed.
It completely failed to gain any traction. The event just dispersed. It was neutralized by the sheer weight of that community resistance, a decisive local victory.
It was a profound symbol of what that county could do when it was unified. But this is the critical turn in the story, isn't it?
It is. This is where it becomes the story of unfinished work. All of that energy, that unity, that moral clarity, it should have fueled the next step.
Which was retrieving the EGI monument.
Right. They won the battle on their home square, but the deep work, the work of historical reconciliation, that was still waiting in Montgomery.
And the problem with crisis-driven energy is that it has a shelf life.
Exactly. Once the immediate threat passed, once the news cameras were gone, the urgency that sparked those early conversations about the monument it faded.
The planning stalled. The work remains unfinished.
It's a classic case of historical inertia being stronger than that immediate moral outrage. The unity was powerful, but it couldn't sustain the long, complex effort that reconciliation requires.
It seems like crisis creates the opportunity for change, but overcoming a century and a half of trauma requires something more.
It requires sustained, sometimes boring, administrative, and financially demanding effort, long after the threat is gone.
So if the 2017 crisis was the modern catalyst, we need to understand the historical weight the community was up against. Why is Rutherford County's history so heavy, specifically around race and wealth?
To understand the monument and why its location is so important, you have to understand the very soil it belongs to.
Okay, so let's dig into that.
When we look at the history of Rutherford County, we're not talking about a place that was just peripherally involved with slavery.
No.
We're talking about a location that was fundamentally built, capitalized, and enriched by it. And the sources give us this one staggering figure.
It is genuinely shocking. And this is a number we just need to let sink in for a moment. At the start of the Civil War, Rutherford County was 55% enslaved.
55%. More than half of the entire population was legally considered property.
What does a number like that even mean in real terms?
It means Rutherford County was one of the most heavily enslaved counties, not just in Tennessee, but in the entire nation. It places it right at the epicenter of the plantation economy.
And that level of enslavement dictates everything. The economy, the social structure, the politics.
Everything. The enslaved population wasn't just labor, they were the engine of wealth. They worked the cotton fields, built the roads, the mills. They literally built the economic infrastructure of the county.
And they also built the physical symbols of power.
They literally constructed the county's iconic courthouse, the building that symbolizes law and order today.
The irony there is just profound. The stones are put in place by people who were denied any standing in the law that building was supposed to represent.
And the physical heart of the county, the courthouse square itself, is the absolute epicenter of this painful history. It holds this deep duality.
Today, it's a site for festivals, concerts, community celebrations. It's the picture of Southern charm.
But historically, that square was a public site of commerce and profound cruelty. The source material is chillingly specific about this.
Slave auctions.
Slave auctions happen right there, in the public eye, often literally on the steps of the courthouse. The buying and selling of human beings, the tearing apart of families, on the same ground where people now gather for farmers markets.
You can't celebrate the present without acknowledging the pain that built it.
And when the Civil War ended slavery as a legal institution, the violence used to enforce the racial hierarchy didn't just vanish.
It just changed form.
Exactly. The violence transformed into what we now call racial terror. This was not random crime. It was a targeted campaign to suppress Black economic and political progress.
To maintain white supremacy without the legal framework of slavery.
And that transformation leads us directly to the specific acts of violence the EGI monument is meant to remember.
The scale of this violence across the country during that period, from Reconstruction up to World War II, is it's hard to comprehend.
Nationally, we're talking about more than 4,400 documented lynchings of African Americans.
And these weren't hidden acts.
No, these were public rituals of violence, often advertised in advance. They were designed to send a lethal message to the entire Black community. Know your place or face the consequences with no due process.
And this is the national context for Rutherford County's specific history.
Right. Our sources identify 4 specific documented lynching victims from Rutherford County, 4 men whose names belong on that monument.
Can you name them for us?
John Jack Bell in 1878, Samuel Smith in 1881, John Jones in 1884, and Henry Morton in 1891.
4 lives taken across 2 decades. But we have to acknowledge that historical records are often incomplete. Right.
Absolutely. Even these four names, which are confirmed through primary source documents, may not be the whole story.
And that brings up a really critical point from the filmmaker Jacqueline Olive. She visited MTSU a few years ago, and her research suggested the number could be much higher.
Yes, her work suggested the number of victims connected to the county could be as high as 9.
So the 4 documented names are just what survived the official records and the silence.
The silence enforced by generations of fear. Exactly. The 4 documented victims are the ones the county must honor, but they stand as a marker for a much deeper trauma that we may never be able to fully quantify.
So today we're focusing on the central tragedy that really defines the need for this monument at the courthouse, the lynching of John Jack Bell in 1878.
It's the most extensively documented case, and it provides the clearest link to the courthouse itself. This one case perfectly illustrates the mechanics of racial terror.
Okay, so let's reconstruct what happened. September 1878. John Jack Bell, a young black man, is accused of assaulting a white woman.
And in the post-Reconstruction South, that accusation was almost always a death sentence, regardless of the facts.
And the sources confirm the evidence was thin.
Thin, contradictory, based on hearsay. His guilt was never tested in any legitimate court. The judicial system was just completely bypassed.
The real crime was violating the racial order of the time.
Precisely. Now, let's get to the crucial detail about the monument's location. Bell was arrested, and he was jailed right there on the courthouse square.
The jail wasn't in some separate, isolated location.
No, it stood directly on the square, just feet from the main courthouse building. Contemporary newspapers always described it as the jail at the courthouse.
Which means everything that happened next was profoundly public.
It wasn't a crime committed in the shadows. The failure of the justice system and the mob rule that followed happened in the visible public heart of the county.
And standing against this was one man, Sheriff James F. Stentz.
Yes. The sources are pretty clear about his actions. He knew a mob was coming.
And in an era where law enforcement often participated in lynchings or just looked the other way, he took a stand.
A definitive stand. He locked the jail, he armed his deputies, and he flatly refused to hand Bell over. He insisted the law had to take its course.
That's a moral choice of enormous weight. He was choosing the rule of law over mob rule, knowing the danger he was in.
And this is where that historical footnote in the sources about the Spence family becomes so poignant.
The name has deep roots in the county, right?
Very deep, back to the early 1800s. And the name Spence keeps appearing in local law enforcement and civic history, even today.
People like Deputy Chief Steve Spence or Terry Spence.
Right. And while we can't confirm a direct line of descent, the continuity of the name in public service creates this profound contrast. Sheriff James Spence's choice in 1878, his willingness to die defending a black prisoner's right to a trial. It stands as this immense historical standard.
But his moral stand, sadly, wasn't enough.
No. The mob was massive, hundreds of people, heavily armed.
Armed with what?
Pistols, shotguns, even axes to break down the jail doors. They surrounded the square, shouting threats. It was an organized insurrection against the county's legal authority.
And they overpowered the sheriff.
They did. They stormed the jail and dragged Jack Bell out onto the square into full view of the community.
You try to imagine that moment.
Pulled from the supposed safety of the law, and according to the sources, he begged for his life. He insisted on his innocence, and he asked for the one thing the law owed him.
A trial.
A fair trial. And he was denied. The mob dragged him to the edge of town near the old Lebanon Road, and they murdered him.
And the aftermath is just as important as the act itself.
Crucial. His body wasn't removed immediately. It was left hanging for hours. A public spectacle, a chilling message to every black resident in the county.
And the final failure of the law.
No one was ever charged. No one was ever held accountable. The rule of law was completely defeated in front of the entire community, and the perpetrators walked free.
This is the unacknowledged truth that the monument has to hold. And all of it, all that history points right back to one location.
The courthouse square.
So let's talk about the Rutherford County Courthouse. It's an iconic building in Tennessee.
It is. But as we now understand, it's also a palimpsest of history. Layers of older, painful texts are visible right underneath the surface. It's one of the most complicated civic buildings in the state.
And let's just reiterate those layers. It was built with enslaved labor.
It was the site of slave auctions.
And it was the literal physical site of Jack Bell's abduction and the public defeat of justice.
For decades, though, that complexity was sort of obscured or dominated by one thing.
The Johnny Reb Confederate statue.
Right. That statue became this singular, polarizing symbol that ignored all the other layers of history.
So when Mayor Bill Ketron came into office, he had a deeply divided community on his hands, especially after 2017.
And his administration's approach, according to the Sarkas, was a significant compromise. Transform the courthouse into a memorial museum.
The idea being to add context, not just to the statue, but to the county's entire racial past.
Exactly. And while people can still debate the politics of that compromise, what it did, functionally, was create an explicit public space dedicated to historical truth.
And that transformation is what makes the courthouse square the only appropriate location for the EJI monument.
It's not about finding a quiet spot in a park somewhere.
No, because of the geography of the crime.
Since the jail stood on the square and Jack Bell was taken from that exact ground, the Courthouse Museum is no longer just a symbolic location. It is the literal historical site of the crime.
Placing the monument there changes it from a general memorial into this site-specific testament to the failure of the law that happened right on that ground.
So every time someone goes to the courthouse for jury duty or for a festival, they have to contend with the historical weight of the ground beneath their feet.
That connection between past and present is vital for any kind of genuine healing. But as we said at the beginning, that moral clarity has a tough time sustaining momentum.
Right. We established that the first effort, the one born from the Murfreesboro Loves Energy in 2017, just fizzled out.
Post-crisis exhaustion, it's a real thing.
It is. And it shows that moral outrage is a powerful fuel. But sustaining this kind of long-term work fundraising, political coordination, research, it requires a different kind of energy.
A deeper, quieter, more sustained commitment.
And this is where a new and maybe unexpected source of inspiration shows up in our sources. The Monks Walk for Peace.
This is a 2,300-mile pilgrimage.
From Fort Worth, Texas, all the way to Washington, D.C., and it's entirely spiritual. Their purpose is to spread peace, but they teach that it has to begin with inner peace.
So it's not a political march, it's a spiritual offering.
Exactly. Our sources say they're currently deep in the Atlanta metro area, heading north, expected to arrive in D.C. in February, and the sheer effort of it. It's a powerful metaphor for the long work of reconciliation.
And their route deliberately connects that spiritual message to America's difficult history.
It does. They walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, the site of Bloody Sunday, and they did it in silence.
Wow.
Just acknowledging the violence that happened there. And then they visited the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, the very place where these monuments hang.
And somewhere among those monuments is the steel pillar designated for Rutherford County.
Waiting. They paused, they prayed, and they walked beneath those columns. They bore witness to that waiting history.
And their journey seems to have this core teaching that speaks directly to Rutherford County's task.
It does. Their teaching is that genuine peace requires truth. You cannot have one without the other.
Peace that avoids the painful past is just avoidance.
It's shallow, it's fragile. And peace that can't name the specific harm that was done is just silence, which only perpetuates the harm.
So their walk is this reminder that inner peace and historical honesty are inseparable.
If the county wants genuine peace in the present, it has to be rigorously honest about the past it inherited.
And this brings us to the most complex, critical detail we found, the logistical snag that has to be fixed before anything else can happen.
This surprising discovery that the names currently on the monument designated for Rutherford County are historically inaccurate.
So you're saying the pillar that's hanging in Montgomery, the one they would retrieve?
Mm-hmm.
It's just wrong.
It is. It's a crucial accuracy issue. The pillar does not reflect the 4 men actually lynched in Rutherford County. Instead, it lists 4 names that research has definitively placed in other counties, even other states.
How does an error like that happen?
It seems to be an earlier data or placement discrepancy. You have to remember, EJI was assembling a massive historical database with thousands of victims. It's understandable, but it's still deeply problematic for the community trying to honor their specific dead.
It's a moral imperative to get it right.
Absolutely. So let's detail the incorrect names currently on the monument. You have Boot Alexander, James Russell, Houston Turner, and George Johnson.
And where do they actually belong?
Well, Boot Alexander has been verified as belonging to Robertson County, Tennessee. James Russell is likely from Robertson or Sumner County. Houston Turner is tracked to Maury or Giles County.
And George Johnson,
George Johnson is from Indiana, which just shows you the scale of the geographical error.
That's a huge discrepancy.
It is, and the sources offer a fascinating clue about how one of these errors, the Boot Alexander name, might have happened.
What's the theory?
There was a man named Burke Alexander. He was mentioned briefly in the 1878 newspaper accounts about Jack Bell's lynching. Not because he was from Rutherford County, but because his own killing had happened nearby the year before.
So the phonetic similarity. Burke and Boot.
That might be the historical breadcrumb that led to the misplacement of the Robertson County victim's name onto the Rutherford County monument.
So the bottom line is the process of reconciliation requires this careful, almost forensic historical work before you can have any kind of public ceremony.
Yes. The 4 verified victims for Rutherford County are John Bell, Samuel Smith, John Jones, and Henry Morton. Those are the names that belong there.
And we should probably mention Ephraim Grizzard because his name sometimes causes confusion.
Right. EJI sometimes lists him under Rutherford, but primary sources confirm he and his brother were actually lynched in Davidson County. These are the kinds of specific details that researchers have to untangle.
So before any retrieval ceremony can happen, this has to be fixed.
Yes, a small group of researchers is preparing the documentation now, the primary source evidence, the archival materials, to formally petition EJI for this correction.
And this isn't about assigning blame for the error.
Not at all. It's entirely about honoring the correct victims with integrity. When you're acknowledging historical trauma, accuracy is everything. You have to bring home a monument that tells your community's actual story.
Once that's done, EGI has a very clear process for retrieval.
A 7-step roadmap, and it focuses on long-term reconciliation, not just a one-day event.
What's step 1?
Form a broad, multiracial coalition. This is critical. It ensures the effort is representative of the whole community. It's basically formalizing the lesson of Murfreesboro Loves.
Step 2 is local research and public education. The community needs to understand the history before the monument arrives.
Exactly. You have to prepare people to receive the history, not just the physical marker. Step 3 is select a permanent public site,
Which we've established is the Courthouse Museum.
the most meaningful location. Then step 4 is the administrative part. Submit a formal request to EJI.
And then the ceremonial aspects.
Steps 5 and 6. Participate in a retrieval ceremony in Montgomery, which is a powerful moment of witness, and then transport and install the monument locally.
And step 7 feels like the most important one.
It might be. Commit to ongoing stewardship. This isn't the finish line. It's the beginning of a generational responsibility for education, truth-telling, and remembrance.
So if Murfreesboro Loves was the spark, and the Monk's Walk is the reminder of sustained intention,
Then the logistical work of correcting the record and following this process is the actual mechanism for finally finishing the work they all started.
Rutherford County's history is clearly not simple. It's not easy. And as the story of Jack Bell shows, it's profoundly uncomfortable.
But the sources make it clear that this history, in all its complexity, belongs to the community. It's their shared inheritance. Ignoring it just fractures them.
And the monument waiting in Montgomery, that steel column that must bear the corrected names of John Bell, Samuel Smith, John Jones, and Henry Morton, it's a physical embodiment of that difficult story.
And it belongs on the courthouse square, on the soil where justice so publicly failed.
The first coalition got close, but the moment slipped away.
But now, armed with the knowledge that accuracy has to come before ceremony, and inspired by their own history of rising to moral challenges, the community has a clear roadmap.
The task ahead is clear. Bring the monument home, but make sure it's the right monument, honoring the correct victims placed on the most meaningful ground.
And we close with that core lesson from the monk's quiet pilgrimage: the inseparable connection between inner peace and historical truth.
If we want a peaceful present and a just future, we have to be ruthlessly honest and sustained in our efforts to understand the past.
So we ask you, the listener, to reflect on this. What personal step might you take to contribute to finishing this kind of work, this specific work of historical honesty? Because historical truth, just like peace, isn't a destination. It's something we have to practice, step by deliberate step.